They said one cell in a Siberian prison was never opened. Not by guards, not by soldiers, not by anyone. It wasn't locked by steel or chains. It was locked by words. Words spoken in a language that no longer exists. But what happens when someone dares to speak those words again? The helicopter blades faded into the distance, leaving only the howl of the Siberian wind. Elias Ward pulled his coat tighter and stepped onto the frozen ground. Ahead, the prison rose like a jagged scar against the white horizon. The walls were thick concrete, cracked by decades of frost, and the watchtowers leaned like broken teeth. His boots crunched over ice as he crossed the empty yard. Barbed wire still clung to the fences, twisted and rusted, like the claws of something that had refused to die. The gate stood open. No guards, no chains, only silence. Elias paused and looked around. His breath clouded in front of him. He thought, how many men walked into this place and never walked out? He pushed the thought aside and entered through the main doors. Inside, the air was colder than outside. The corridors stretched long and narrow, lined with peeling paint and frozen pipes. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, bouncing off walls scrawled with faded slogans in Russian. Footsteps echoed behind him. He froze and turned, light steady. A figure appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a heavy fur coat. "Dr. Ward?" The man's voice was deep, cautious. Elias lowered the beam. "You must be Anton." Anton stepped closer, his face weathered, a thick beard coated with frost. "I should not be here, but I promise to guide you. My grandfather was a guard in this prison." He spoke of a door that no one could open. Elias studied him for a moment. "The fourth door," Anton nodded. "Yes." He said it was sealed not with iron but with language. The men believed it was cursed. Some tried to open it. They were never the same again. Elias's eyes narrowed. "Language as a lock. That is no superstition. That is design." They moved together down the corridor. Their boots broke thin sheets of ice on the floor. Cells lined the walls, doors hanging open like gaping mouths. Elias stopped at one, sweeping the beam inside. Metal bunks, overturned stools, graffiti carved into concrete. Among the carvings, he traced his gloved fingers over strange marks. Not Russian, older. He pulled a notebook from his coat and copied them quickly. "Not random," he whispered. "This is structured." Anton shifted uneasily. "You believe this is the key?" Elias closed the notebook. The beginning of it. They pressed deeper into the prison. A door creaked as the wind forced its way through broken windows. Snow dust swirled in shafts of pale light. At the end of the hall, Elias found a steel staircase frozen with icicles. They descended into the lower level, the air growing heavy with damp. The basement was darker, the smell of rust and old stone filling their lungs. Elias swept his light across the walls. His beam landed on a number painted in black, 4. The paint had faded, but the mark was still visible. Anton stepped back. "This is it." The fourth door. The door loomed before them. Unlike the others, it was not rusted. It was intact, smooth and heavy, as if it had been reinforced. A small grille sat at eye level, but no handle, no keyhole. Only a smooth surface. Elias pressed his hand against it. Cold bit through his glove. He leaned closer, listening. Nothing but silence. He whispered to himself, "It does not need a key. It needs a voice." Anton frowned. "You think you can open it?" Elias straightened. "Not yet, but somewhere in this prison there are words. A sequence, a pattern may be hidden in a diary or a map. They designed this to be solved. Not by strength, but by thought." For a moment, the two men stood in silence before the door. The air seemed heavier here, as if the prison itself was holding its breath. Elias pulled the strap of his satchel tighter. "We start with the records. Guards kept logs. Prisoners kept diaries. Somewhere in these walls is the voice the door is waiting for." Anton shifted his weight. "And if we find it, do you know what lies behind?" Elias looked into the black grill. His own reflection stared back in the glassy surface. He whispered almost to himself, "That is what I intend to find out." The corridor bent to the left and opened into a records wing. Rusted cabinets leaned against each other like tired men. A ceiling panel had dropped, and frozen water formed a glass sheet on the floor. Elias lifted his light and saw shelves stacked with folders bound by cloth tape. A red star had faded on the wall. "Guards kept index logs," he said. "Look for a filing code." Numbers with a letter prefix. Anton scanned a metal drawer. "These are intake papers, names, sentences. The year is 1952. Elias brushed frost from a ledger and turned a stiff page. Ink bled into paper. A line caught his eye. Cell markers listed as 1, 2, 3, then a blank, then 5. He pressed the page closer. The fourth cell number was absent from the printed chart. In the margin, a hand had written only a symbol. It looked like a forked mark with a small dot above it. "Someone hid the reference to the fourth door," he said. They removed the number from official print and replaced it with a glyph. Anton looked over his shoulder. Why hide a number in a ledger? Unless the cell was not official. Elias kept flipping. He found a smaller ledger inside. The cover was gray cloth. On the first page, a line read P47. The handwriting was fine and hard. The dates matched the winter of 1953. "This is a prisoner index," Elias said. 47 has daily notes. But the entries are short. He turned another page. The words shifted. Russian sentences dissolved into fragments. In the margins, the writer had added marks that were not Cyrillic. They looked like phonetic symbols. Diacritic lines, arcs for tone, triangles for stress. "Not random," Elias whispered. "This is metrical notation. A way to mark how to speak, not what to say." Anton kept watch at the door. The wind moaned through the broken vents. From somewhere above, a metal sheet slammed once, then fell silent. "Read it," Anton said. "What does it say?" Elias raised the light and read aloud. "Breath on the 3rd. Hold on the 5th. Mouth narrow. Tongue back. Repeat pair 2. Then the door will notice." Anton frowned. "The door will notice." "That is superstition." Elias shook his head. "Or it is an instruction for a voice sensor. If you know how old labs designed early voice systems, they used crude phoneme detection. Tone, duration, simple sequence. If you get it wrong, the system rejects you. If you get it right, it triggers a latch." He flipped to the back of the ledger. A thin sheet had been pasted inside the cover. He slid a blade under it and lifted it free. Behind it was a folded map, brittle and yellow. He opened it slowly on a cleared patch of shelf. It showed the prison layout, stairwells, service tunnels, duct runs. The fourth door sat at a junction that touched 3 walls. A small circle was drawn on the far side of the cell. The circle led to a narrow line that continued into a maintenance corridor. "There is a second exit," Elias said, "a route that bypasses the main hall. If the door opens, someone can enter from the other side later. That means they planned access even if the front was sealed." Anton traced the line with a gloved finger. "This corridor is under the laundry block. It may be collapsed." Elias turned back to the ledger. He found a full page of symbols with short notes in Russian. He read them in a low voice. "Not a language of the region. These are reconstructed sounds, based on Old Church Slavonic vowel shapes maybe. The writer is building a sequence of sounds that are no longer used in modern speech. He is trying to fake an extinct profile." He took out his pencil and began to transcribe. He marked a column for vowel height and a column for voicing. He wrote small notes about stress timing and gaps of silence. His brow tightened. He spoke to himself without looking up. If the system is inside the door, the grill is the microphone. The diaphragm would be behind a mesh. The frequency response would be poor. So the pattern must rely on strong contrasts. Back vowels against front vowels. Voiced against unvoiced. Nasalized against pure... He stopped and listened. A faint engine sound rolled through the concrete, low and steady. Anton heard it too. He moved to the window and peered through a crack in the frost. "Snow bikes," he said. "2, maybe 3. They are not from the village." Elias closed the ledger. "Militia." Anton nodded once. "We should move." Elias slid the ledger into his satchel. He kept the folded map in his inner pocket. He checked the room for anything else. At the base of a cabinet, a thin wooden box lay on its side. He opened it and found a reel of magnetic tape. The label read, "Test Sequence." He turned the spool in his hand. The tape had dried, but the oxide still clung to the base. "Recordings," Elias said. "If we can find a reader, we can hear how they trained the system." Anton looked at the door. "There is an old radio room near the infirmary. My grandfather said they had a tape deck there. It might still be there." They stepped back into the hall and moved fast. Elias kept the flashlight low to hide the beam. They passed a wall with chalk lines left by hands that had counted days. The marks rose and fell like a tide on stone. The engine sound grew clearer, then stopped. Silence pressed in again. Boots in the snow outside. Voices carried by the wind. At the infirmary, the door was half open and a metal gurney lay on its side. Cabinets hung crooked on broken hinges. A shelf in the corner held a radio chassis. Tubes shattered, cables cut. Beside it sat a grey tape deck under a cover of frost. Elias brushed it clean and checked the heads with a small cloth. He wound the tape gently onto the spindle. The belt inside crumbled. He frowned. "It will not run," Anton said. Elias scanned the shelves and found another unit. It was older. It used a hand crank to move the reels. He set the test tape on one reel and the empty spool on the other. He turned the crank slowly. The tape moved. The capstan groaned but held. The speaker crackled with static. Then a thin tone pierced the room. A voice followed. It was mechanical and flat. It read a series of sounds in a steady pace, long and short, he paused. Then the same sequence pitched lower, then higher, then with nasalization. Elias listened with his eyes closed. He counted silently. He tapped his finger against the deck. He stopped the crank and rewound a foot of tape by hand. "Again," he said. He turned the crank and listened to the same line. He whispered as he wrote. "2 long, 3 short, 1 rest, vowel shift front to back, fricative unvoiced. Repeat the first pair but lower in pitch." He pulled the tape off and set the reel back in the box. He looked at Anton. "This is the pattern the door expects. It is not words. It is performance. The system wants a mouth from another century." Anton glanced at the hallway. "Then we must reach the door before they reach us." They moved out and kept close to the wall. Frost crisped under their boots. At an intersection they heard a shout outside. Then a metal bar struck the gate. Elias held up a hand and listened to the echoes. He mapped the distances in his head. He pointed down a service stair and they went down 2 flights. They reached the lower corridor again. The air felt heavier. The painted number 4 waited on the wall like a warning. The door stood in the beam of the flashlight, cold, smooth, patient. Elias set the satchel down and pulled out his notes. He positioned his mouth near the grill. He looked at the symbols. He breathed in, steady and slow. He thought of the tape. He thought of the old vowel shapes. He thought of the gaps of silence that were part of the code. He began to speak. Each sound was clear and plain. He held the long notes. He clipped the short ones. He paused where the marks told him to pause. He lowered his pitch on the repeat. He let the last tone hang in the cold air like a line of ice. For a moment nothing moved. Then a dull knock came from inside the door. A second knock followed. A mechanism stirred inside the wall like a buried animal, waking in winter. Elias stepped back and kept his voice low. "It is listening." The dull knocks faded, but the air near the 4th door still felt charged. Elias lowered his notes and listened. No more movement inside, only the bass hum of wind in the vents and the distant scrape of metal on metal. He turned to Anton. "We need the maintenance route," Elias said. "If the front fails, the second exit gives us options." Anton nodded once. "Laundry block. Service tunnel. This way." They moved fast through the lower hall. Frost cracked under their steps. At a junction, Elias raised the map and aligned a broken pipe with a mark on the paper. He traced the narrow line with a gloved finger. It slid behind the laundry and turned under a stairwell. He checked the wall for the symbol he had seen in the ledger. A small forked mark had been scratched into the paint near the floor. The same dot above it. He smiled to himself. "Whoever drew this wanted us to find it," he said. "Or wanted only the right kind of person to find it," Anton replied. They slipped into a narrow passage. The ceiling dropped low. Steam pipes ran overhead, wrapped in torn insulation. The smell of old soap and rust mixed with the cold air. Elias kept his light on the ground to avoid throwing shadows. Ahead, the tunnel dipped and pooled with thin ice. A grate lay twisted near the drain. He knelt and lifted it aside. Under the grate, a conduit ran right. The map showed the same turn. Elias crawled in first. The metal was numb and slick under his knees. The space narrowed, then opened enough for him to crouch. He checked the map again. The line crossed a small square that marked an inspection alcove. He counted his paces. 10, 15. He felt for a seam on the right. His fingers found a lip of concrete. He pressed and the panel gave a fraction. He wedged the blade in and pried. The panel lifted with a dry crack. Behind it, a shelf held a steel box with a faded label. He pulled it out and wiped the frost. The tag read "Spare Diaphragm." He opened the lid. Inside lay a round disc sealed in wax paper and a small metal tool. "Microphone service kit," he said. They expected failure. They kept parts near the route. Anton steadied the light. "The grill at the door may use the same size." Elias resealed the box and slid it into his satchel. He checked the alcove one more time. A strip of paper had stuck to the back wall. He pinched it free. It held 3 marks in a row. 2 short arcs and a long bar. He tucked it with his notes. Voices drifted in from above. Men talked low in Russian. A radio clicked. Boots hit a metal stair. Elias held a finger to his lips and killed the light. In the dark, the tunnel felt like the inside of a lung. He breathed through his teeth to control the sound. A beam swept across the grate he had moved. It paused, then slid on. Anton leaned close. "They will search the lower level soon." "We stay ahead," Elias said. "We take the service corridor to the back of the 4th cell. If the rear panel exists, we confirm. If it opens, we have leverage." They crawled deeper and reached a split where the conduit met a brick wall. The map showed a hidden hatch at waist height. Elias ran his hands along the bricks. One felt smoother than the rest. He pressed and twisted. A latch clicked. The hatch swung in a hand's width. Cold air leaked through. He widened the opening and stepped into a narrow vertical shaft. A fixed ladder ran up 3 meters to a catwalk. He climbed, boots finding each rung by touch. Anton followed and eased the hatch shut behind them. The catwalk trembled under their weight. Below, a sump pit lay frozen like black glass. To the left, a door without a handle sat flush with the concrete. It had a recessed panel set at mouth height. No keyhole, no hinges visible. Elias checked the map. The thin line ended here on the far side of the 4th cell. He put his ear to the panel. Silence. He rapped twice with a knuckle and listened for the echo pattern. The return was tight and shallow. "Thin wall," he said. "A cavity behind it. That could be the cell interior." Anton scanned the shadows. "If we open this from the back, what do we face?" "Guard systems, traps. Maybe a pressure switch or a simple spring latch," Elias said. "The front side listens for a voice. The back side is for maintenance crews who knew the sequence and had clearance." He set the satchel down and took out the metal tool from the box. He examined the recessed panel. 4 tiny screws held a plate in place. He turned each with care. The plate loosened and slid free. Behind it, a membrane sat torn and brittle. He lifted it with tweezers. The cavity held a small cage for the diaphragm and a coil pickup. "Dead," he said. No surprise. But if the system is passive enough, it might still respond to pressure pulses. He unpacked the spare diaphragm and fixed it in the cage. It seated with a crisp fit. He replaced the plate and tightened the screws. He placed his mouth near the panel and read his notes. He spoke the same pattern as before. Long and short, clear vowels, clean fricatives, a pause at the right length, a drop in pitch that matched the tape. The panel vibrated against his lips. A faint click sounded inside the wall. Another click answered from lower in the frame. Metal shifted. Something inside moved a few millimeters and stopped. A stale breath of air escaped through a seam at the edge. "It is linked," Elias said. "Front and back. The system hears from both sides. It compares and confirms." A clatter of boots struck concrete beyond the shaft. A door slammed above them. A voice barked an order. The beam of a flashlight cut through the slats at the top of the shaft and moved on. Anton gripped the ladder rail. "They are in this block." Elias tested the panel again with a short pair of tones. Nothing changed. He closed his eyes and pictured the tape deck and the shaping of the vowels. He spoke the sequence once more, but this time he widened one vowel and kept his tongue higher at the back. He extended the third note by a fraction and shortened the fifth. He let the pause breathe. He finished on a touched whisper. The wall answered with a heavy internal thud. The panel loosened under his hand. A narrow seam opened along the frame and stopped at the width of 2 fingers. Cold air spilled out from the cell. Elias looked at Anton. "We have a partial release." Anton set his shoulder to the panel. Elias slipped the metal tool into the seam and felt for a bar. He found one near the bottom. He levered it up and pushed. The bar rose and caught. He pushed harder. It moved another notch. Voices echoed again. Closer now. A radio crackled. Someone laughed. Someone coughed. Elias pressed the bar one more time. The seam widened to the width of a hand. "That is enough," he said. "We can slip through one at a time." He pulled the opening wider and slid inside first. The cell air was dry and bitter. His light fell over a small room with smooth walls and a concrete slab in the center. No bed, no bucket, no marks. Only a stand at the far wall with a metal frame and an empty slot shaped like a book. Elias felt his heartbeat rise. He spoke in a low voice. "They did not lock a man in here. They locked something else." The cell was smaller than Elias expected. The light caught fine dust hanging in the air. The walls were smoother than the corridors outside. The slab in the center looked like a table cut from one block of concrete. The metal frame on the far wall held an empty slot with clean edges. It was the size of a book but thicker. Anton slipped through the opening and pulled the panel in behind him. The seam closed to a thin line. He kept his voice low. What did they keep here? Elias scanned the floor with his beam. Not a man. A device, or a record that needed control. He moved to the slab. He put his palm flat on it. It was cold and dense. He tapped with a knuckle near the corner. The tap came back dull. He tapped near the center. The return was higher. He mapped the tones with quick touches. Different cavity sizes, he said. Hollow channels inside. Structured resonance. Anton pointed to the frame. This slot, it took a block. A book in a case, see the faint marks. Lead residue. Elias leaned close. The edge held a gray line where metal had rubbed stone. He scraped a trace with his nail. It crumbled like soft powder. Lead sealed, he said. Whoever took it knew what they were doing. The removal is recent by the look of the clean line. He opened his satchel and pulled the prisoner 47 ledger. He held it next to the slot. The ledger was too thin. He placed it on the slab and turned to the wall. Under the frame, he found a small grill the size of a coin. He held his breath and listened. Nothing. He spoke softly. If the slot sensed the presence of the object, it might have also sensed heat or sound. Anton walked the perimeter. His boot grazed a strip of metal near the floor. It clicked under his heel. He froze. Elias crouched and brushed frost away. A thin plate lay flush with the wall. A notation had been stamped into it in tiny letters. He squinted. "Service latch," he said. 1, 2, 3. Then hold. He pressed the plate 3 times and held it down. A relay murmured in the wall. The slab trembled very slightly. A seam appeared near the center. It opened by the width of a fingernail. "Help me," Elias said. They set their hands on the slab and shifted their weight. The top moved a fraction. Cold air rose from below. Elias wedged his tool into the seam and levered. The lid lifted on a stiff hinge. Inside lay a shallow cavity with 2 items wrapped in oiled cloth. He lifted the first. It was a small metal canister with a screw cap. The second was a flat packet bound with thread. He opened the canister. A roll of microfilm gleamed in the light. A label inside read Gromov Unit. Phonetic Lock Trials, Series I-4. Anton watched the door seam. Voices carried through concrete. Boots scraped nearby. A man coughed and a radio crackled. "Time," Anton said. Elias opened the packet. Inside were 3 sheets of thick paper covered by precise drawings, mouth diagrams, tongue positions, vowel charts marked with dots and arrows. At the bottom of the first page, a note in Russian read, "Alignment step for a 2-voice confirmation." Elias read it twice. He lifted his head. "They use 2 sources," he said, "front and back. The system expects a duet, a staggered sequence. It is why the panel only released part way." He handed a sheet to Anton and pointed at the marks. "I will speak the front line," Elias said. "You hold the back vowels. When I drop, you rise. When I pause, you carry a sustained tone. Not singing, just clean breath with shape." Anton nodded. "I am not a linguist." "You do not need to be." "Hear the shapes. Feel the mouth round, narrow, tongue high, then low. Match the arrows." A short burst of light flashed under the seam of the front door. A beam swept across and vanished. Someone outside the cell moved away. Elias set the microfilm back and closed the slab lid. He pressed the service plate again to settle it. He stood at the internal panel opposite the grill. He placed his mouth near the metal. "On my count," he said. 3, 2, 1. Elias began the pattern he had learned from the tape. Long, short, pause. Lower pitch, front vowel, back vowel. His breath made the diaphragm vibrate. The wall hummed like a thin drum. Anton followed the marks on his sheet. He held a steady tone when Elias dipped. He changed shape when Elias moved to a new vowel. He kept the air even. He watched Elias for each cue. A relay clicked. Another followed from the lower hinge. The seam at the front door widened by a finger. Elias kept going. He shifted to the second pair. He clipped the consonant with a dry hiss. Anton matched the long hold. A low thud sounded in the frame. The seam widened again. "Do not stop," Elias whispered between notes. They finished the third sequence. Elias gave the last tone a slight rise at the end. Anton held his line clean. The door answered with a heavy clack. The lock pins retracted deep into the wall. The front door moved. It slid a hand's width, then stopped. Cold light leaked in. Snow dust swirled in the gap. Elias lifted his finger in a warning. 2 shadows cut across the crack. The men outside had not noticed the movement yet. Elias spoke in a thread of a voice. "We need a misdirect." He pointed to the empty slot in the wall. He slid the prisoner 47 ledger into the frame. It did not fit, but it wedged enough to press a hidden switch. A soft tone vibrated the air. Somewhere in the ducts a fan started. Warm air drifted through the grill and fogged in the cold. The fog rose and rolled toward the door. Heat plume, Elias said. The system thinks the object returned. It may draw them. The voices outside stopped. A boot stepped close. The door moved another inch as the pressure equalized. A hand shoved into the gap and tried to pull. The man outside swore and called out. Another man answered from the hall. Anton leaned to Elias. We should go out the back. Not yet, Elias said. We leave with proof. He opened the slab once more by pressing the plate. He took the microfilm canister and the diagram sheets. He tucked them inside his coat. He closed the slab and covered the seam with his glove to erase prints. The front door ground open another hand's width as the latch gave. A rifle muzzle appeared in the gap. The guard pushed the barrel through and tried to lever the door wider. The metal scraped loud against the frame. Elias lifted the maintenance panel they had used and held it partly open. He gestured to Anton. You first, he said. Anton slid through the gap and into the shaft. Elias followed to the threshold and looked back at the cell one last time. The empty slot on the wall stared like a missing tooth. He thought, I need the case that belonged here. I need the record that was removed. He slipped into the shaft and pulled the panel shut. The seam closed to a line. A second later, the front door crashed inward and struck the slab. Voices shouted. Boots flooded the cell. In the dark of the shaft, Elias took a slow breath. He felt the microfilm canister under his coat. He spoke in a whisper. Now we know what the door was built to protect, and who trained it to listen. They climbed the ladder in the dark shaft. Metal hummed under their boots. Voices still echoed in the cell behind the wall. A radio snapped with static and short commands. Elias pushed the hatch above and slid out onto a catwalk near the laundry block. He pulled Anton up and closed the hatch with a quiet click. We need a reader for the microfilm, Elias said. The radio room might still work. Anton pointed across the steam pipes. Infirmary wing. Second door past the stair. They moved under the catwalk and crossed a narrow bridge. The wind from broken windows carried needles of ice. Elias checked the corridor and led the way. His breath smoked in the beam of the flashlight. He kept it low to avoid detection. At the infirmary wing, the smell of antiseptic and rust clung to the air. The radio room door was stuck. Elias slipped a blade into the jamb and lifted. The wood groaned once and gave way. Inside, dust covered a table with a dead console. On the far shelf sat a microfilm viewer with a cracked hood and a spare bulb taped to the side. Elias set the viewer on the table and opened the side panel. He replaced the bulb and checked the belt. It was dry but intact. He fed the film into the reel path and cranked the knob. The light warmed. The screen glowed a pale square. A title frame appeared in Russian. Gromov unit. Phonetic lock trials. Series of Foo. A dateline read February 1953. The next frame showed a lab drawing. A door with 2 microphones. Arrows marked front and rear. A note under it read phase offset required. This confirms the duet, Elias said. Front and back. Offset on purpose. He advanced the film. The next frame showed a list of test subjects by number. A line had a black bar over the name. The note read custodial subject with perfect pitch. The following frame showed oscillograms of spoken sequences, long and short tones, vowel transitions, timing grids. Anton stood guard at the door. Tell me the short version. Elias nodded and scanned the annotations. They built a lock that cannot be opened by reading a phrase. It must be performed. A wrong mouth shape fails. A wrong timing fails. They wanted a key that no paper could hold. He turned the knob again. A photo filled the screen. It showed a box inside a lead case with a hinged lid. The case matched the slot in the cell. The label read Archive Core A. The next frame showed a checklist. Confirm placement. Confirm seal. Confirm temperature. Confirm last sound. Elias leaned closer. Last sound. They recorded a final tone on placement. The object had to hear it before the system would close. Anton kept his voice even. So the object was not only sealed, It was registered by sound. Elias advanced a few more frames. A chart showed a final test log. A technician had written a note in tight letters. Core OMI removed by order. Transfer to Site K at latitude marks. The coordinates were partly burned out on the film. Only the first two numbers remained clear. Elias copied them in his notebook. He felt the rush of a new path open in his mind. He looked up at Anton. They moved the case, he said, sometime after the system went live. The slot is empty because someone took the archive to another place. From the corridor came a quick shuffle of boots. A man coughed. Elias killed the light and held his breath. Two beams swept past the bottom of the door. Voices argued in low tones. One insisted the tracks ended at the lower hall. Another said to check the infirmary again. Their boots paused outside the radio room. The handle rattled once. Then the steps moved on. Anton exhaled. Oh, it will not be lucky twice. Elias rewound the film and slipped it back into the canister. He put the diagram sheets into his inner pocket. He checked his watch by feel. He thought, we have a lead. We need time to test the full sequence and then we need to leave. He crossed to a cabinet and pulled out a wooden case with letters stamped on the lid. Inside lay two throat mics, a small battery pack and a splitter. He held one to his neck and handed the other to Anton. Training, Elias said. We will record the duet clean and test it against a resonant surface. Anton fixed the strap under his collar. Tell me the shapes again. Elias drew a quick chart on a dusty clipboard. He marked the front vowels with dots and the back vowels with dashes. He wrote short notes. Jaw narrow, tongue back, nasal off. He set a metronome from the console and wound it by hand. The ticking filled the room like a soft heartbeat. On four, Elias said. You hold the second tone when I drop. Keep it steady. Do not chase me. Let the offset happen. They spoke into the mics. The sound entered the tape unit with a dry hiss. Elias moved through the pattern with clean cuts. Anton held the long tones and changed on cue. After a pass, Elias played it back through a small speaker and pressed a stethoscope disc against the metal cabinet. The cabinet hummed. The low tones stacked and made a slight beat that pulsed in the metal. Phase lock, Elias said. We are close. He adjusted the metronome a hair faster. They recorded again. He widened one vowel. He raised the pitch on the fifth by a fraction. He shortened a pause by 2 ticks. On playback, the cabinet sang with a low resonance that settled into a fixed hum. That is it, he said. The door will take this with no hesitation. A loud bang echoed down the hall. A door had been kicked in. A voice shouted orders. Boots slammed against tile. The searchline was coming back. Anton looked at the window. It was frosted and barred. We go now. Elias unplugged the mics and tucked the splitter into his coat. He took the microfilm and the diagram sheets and zipped his satchel. He checked the map again. A service stair ran from the infirmary to a delivery dock. The dock opened to the yard near the collapsed watchtower. They slipped into the stairwell. The steps were stone and slick with ice. The echo from above bounced around them like broken glass. Elias kept the flashlight low and counted landings. 1, 2. On the third landing, a steel door blocked the path. The lock had rusted into a thick crust. Anton tested the handle and shook his head. Frozen. Elias took a small blowback torch from his kit and warmed the latch. He timed the heat in short bursts to avoid a plume of steam. He tapped the lock with the handle of his blade. The ice cracked. The handle moved a fraction. He set his weight and turned. The latch gave with a dull clank. They stepped into a narrow corridor with broken crates stacked along one wall. At the end, daylight bled through a torn tarp. The dock door hung crooked on a bent rail. Beyond it, the yard was a broad sheet of white with black posts poking out like bones. Elias scanned the ground. Snow had drifted deep against the wall. The wind carried a fine mist that hid footprints fast. He pointed to the left. Watchtower, he said. There is a drop to a drainage channel. We cut across and follow the fence to the tree line. They ran low along the wall. The cold bit through their coats. Elias felt the microfilm canister knock against his ribs as he moved. He kept a hand on it as if it could slip through his coat and vanish. He thought, this is proof. This is the path to the archive and to the people who moved it. Shouts rose behind them. A whistle cut the air. A rifle cracked. Snow jumped near their feet. They dropped behind a concrete block and waited for the follow-up shot. None came. The shooter was adjusting his aim. Elias looked at Anton. On my mark. 3 steps. Drop. 3 steps. Drop. They moved in bursts. Shots snapped and missed. They reached the shadow of the broken watchtower. A rusted ladder lay half buried in white. Elias dragged it free enough to bridge the drainage channel. They crossed and kicked snow over the rungs to hide the metal. They slipped into the tree line and took the narrow path between black trunks. The prison fell behind like a gray ship in a frozen sea. The wind softened. The sound of the search faded into the distance. Elias finally spoke. We learned the lock. We trained the duet. We confirmed the removal and found coordinates for transfer. Anton kept pace beside him. What now? Elias looked at the pale sun through bare branches. Now we leave Siberia. We chase the archive to Site K, and we make sure the voices that built this door do not close it on anyone else again. The forest was silent, but Elias knew they were not alone. He crouched low behind a tree and scanned the snowy path. The branches above swayed with the wind. In the distance, the faint hum of engines rolled over the white hills. He adjusted his satchel and spoke in a low tone. They have snow bikes. They will close the ground faster than us. Anton nodded, his beard thick with frost. There is a village 5 kilometers east. If we reach it, we can take shelter. But they will expect us to run straight there. Elias studied the map from the ledger. A dotted line marked an old service track that cut through the forest toward a frozen river. He tapped it with his gloved finger. We follow this. It gives us cover and leads to a bridge. From the bridge we can split direction. Anton frowned. If the bridge still stands, they pushed forward through the undergrowth. Their boots broke through crusts of snow. Elias kept count of paces in his head. He replayed the sound sequence from the film as a rhythm, using it as a measure of distance. It calmed him. He thought the system was built on order. If I keep order, I keep control. A burst of light flickered between trees. A headlamp swept the woods. Voices shouted. Engines roared louder. Elias dropped to one knee and pulled Anton down. A snow bike passed within 20 meters. The rider hunched low with a rifle slung across his back. Another followed, the tread spitting snow. Anton whispered, "They are sweeping in a line." Elias pointed uphill. "We climb. Higher ground buys time." They scaled the ridge, grabbing branches for support. The snow was deep and heavy. Elias's muscles burned, but he forced the pace. At the top, the forest opened to a small clearing where the ruins of a guard post stood. A half-collapsed tower leaned to the side. Inside, a stove rusted among broken chairs. They ducked in. Elias checked the view slit. He saw 3 more bikes circling below. The riders dismounted and checked the ground for tracks. Anton looked at Elias. "They will find us." Elias pulled the microfilm canister from his coat. He held it in his hand, staring at the faint label. This is what they want. They may not even know what it contains, but they know it is from the 4th door. That is enough. Anton placed a hand on the window frame. "So what do we do?" Elias thought aloud. "We mislead them. If they believe we ran to the village, they will divert." He opened his satchel and pulled out a spare notebook. He scribbled a line of Russian in block letters. Transfer complete. He tore the page and folded it tight. He slipped the note into a rusted tin he found by the stove. He left it on the table where frost had cleared a patch. "If they search here, they will think we passed through and continued east." Anton gave a short nod. "Then we move north." They left the guard post and descended the far side of the ridge. The trees grew denser here, the branches forming a canopy that muffled the wind. Elias kept his light off and moved by moonlight. His breath came sharp in the cold. Behind them, a gunshot cracked. Another followed. Shouts echoed through the trees. The militia had found something. Elias forced his pace, legs heavy. Anton stayed close, his boots crunching in rhythm. After half an hour, they reached the river. The surface was frozen, a flat expanse of silver under the night sky. In the distance, the outline of the bridge rose like a skeleton. One side had collapsed, but a narrow path remained across the center span. Elias stepped onto the ice. It groaned under his weight but held. He scanned the far bank. No lights, only dark forest. He turned to Anton. "We cross, fast!" They moved single file. The ice creaked and flexed. Elias kept his eyes on the bridge. Halfway across, the sound of engines came again. Headlamps flared on the ridge they had left. The militia had spotted them. Rifles fired. Bullets sparked off the ice. "Keep moving!" Elias shouted. They sprinted. The ice cracked behind them. A hole burst open with a splash. Cold water shot into the air. Anton leapt past it, boots hitting solid ice. They reached the bridge and scrambled onto the broken span. Snow fell from the beams as they climbed. On the bridge, Elias ducked behind a support pillar. He pulled his small pistol from his coat. He checked the magazine. Only 4 rounds. He looked at Anton. "They will try to cross the ice. We slow them here." The first bike slid onto the frozen surface. The rider leaned low and accelerated. Elias aimed and fired. The shot echoed over the river. The bullet hit the ice ahead of the bike, fracturing it. The rider swerved, but the machine tipped and skidded. The ice cracked wider and swallowed the bike in a spray of water. The rider's scream cut short as he vanished below. The second bike stopped short. The rider dismounted and fired back. The bullet whined against the pillar. Elias ducked and reloaded. He thought 4 rounds are not enough. "We cannot fight them all," he shouted to Anton. "We use the bridge. We cut it." Anton looked at the supports. "Explosives?" "No, leverage. These beams are loose." They pulled at a rusted crossbar until it groaned and snapped free. Together they shoved it down into the weak section of the bridge. The wood cracked. Metal screamed. The span dipped. The militia shouted from the far side. One tried to cross, but the beam gave way. The span collapsed into the river, dragging 2 men and their rifles into the black water. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of wind. Elias breathed hard. He looked at Anton. "That bought us time." "But they will regroup. They will not stop." Anton asked, "Where do we go now?" Elias stared north into the forest. He tightened the strap on his satchel. "To the coordinates. Site K. If the archive was moved, that is where the answers are. But first we need a way out of Siberia." He stepped off the bridge and into the snowbound woods. His voice was steady, more to himself than to Anton. "We play their game with logic, not fear. We stay ahead. We stay unseen. And we turn their own secrets against them." Snow clung to Elias's coat as he and Anton pushed deeper into the northern forest. The militia had fallen behind after the bridge collapse, but Elias knew they would not abandon the chase. The microfilm in his coat was too valuable. Each step forward was a race against time. They reached a cluster of old huts half buried in snow. The roofs sagged under the weight of ice. Elias brushed frost from a doorframe and tested it with his shoulder. The wood gave way and he stepped inside. The hut smelled of damp wood and ashes. A rusted stove sat in the corner. "We rest here for 1 hour," Elias said. "Long enough to study the documents?" "Not longer." Anton nodded and began piling broken planks into the stove. Elias unwrapped the diagram sheets again and spread them across a table. He held the flashlight low to keep the glow narrow. The sketches of tongue positions and vowel shapes looked almost like maps of terrain. He thought aloud. They did not trust ink on paper, They trusted sound. This archive was not hidden by walls or locks. It was hidden by performance. Whoever designed this wanted to make sure only trained voices could enter. That makes it less a prison and more a vault. Anton fed a small flame. And the vault is empty now. Someone took the case. Elias tapped the note of coordinates he had copied from the film. Not empty, just moved. They carried it to Site K. Whatever was inside is still out there. He folded the diagrams again and slipped them back into his coat. His eyes scanned the walls of the hut. Old Soviet posters peeled from the wood. One showed a soldier pointing forward with the word progress in bold red letters. He thought about the irony. Progress had locked away something dangerous enough to require a prison as camouflage. Anton handed him a small tin cup of melted snow. Elias drank and set it down. He stared at the microfilm canister in his hand. What could justify this level of secrecy? Voice locks, double confirmation, transfer to another site. Not a simple book. Not a file. Anton shrugged. Weapons design, nuclear research. During those years, nothing was too secret. Elias shook his head. Weapons can be hidden in factories, but a system like this, it feels different. They wanted to protect knowledge itself, not a device, but a record of how to build one. That is harder to destroy. He stood and paced the room, the boards creaking under his boots. His voice dropped lower. If this archive contains phonetic data, it could be more than a lock. It could be a code system based on sound. Imagine messages that cannot be broken unless you know the exact performance. A living cipher, that would be worth guarding. Anton looked uneasy. If the militia believes the same, they will not stop. They think this archive has power. Elias's thoughts sharpened. Then our only move is to see it before they do. The question is how far Site K is from here. He unfolded the map again. The coordinates were incomplete. 2 digits burned out on the microfilm frame. He compared the remaining marks to Soviet grid references. His finger traced the line northeast into barren tundra. He muttered, "A region with no settlements." They wanted silence. Suddenly, a crunch of snow outside. Elias froze. He held up a hand. Anton killed the flame in the stove with a quick shove of snow. Darkness swallowed the hut. A voice called in Russian, "Orders." 2 men, boots pressed against the snow. A beam of light swept across the window. Elias crouched low and drew his pistol. He whispered to Anton, "Stay behind the stove." The door creaked open. A soldier stepped inside, rifle raised. His lamp lit the room in a harsh circle. He saw the stove, the broken chairs, the table. He stepped further in. Elias moved from the shadow and pressed the barrel of his pistol to the man's neck. "Quiet," Elias said in Russian. The soldier froze. His partner called from outside. Elias pulled the rifle away and pushed the man down onto the floor. Anton took the rifle and aimed it at the door. The second soldier entered, confused by the silence. Anton fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Snow dust rained down. The man dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Elias kicked the rifle away and gestured for him to kneel. "2 only," Anton whispered. "Her scout team." Elias kept his gun steady. "That means the others are close." He turned to the soldiers. "Where is Site K? What is at the coordinates?" The first man shook his head. "I do not know. Orders only. Bring anything from the prison to command." Elias studied his face. The fear looked real. These were low-level fighters. He pressed harder. "Who gives the orders? Who wants the archive?" The man hesitated, then whispered, "Colonel Markov. He says the archive proves Moscow hid things from its own. He wants it to trade for power," Anton muttered. "A warlord." Elias thought fast. "We cannot stay. We take their supplies and move." He tied the soldiers with strips of cloth and left them on the floor. He picked up a radio from one of the belts and slipped it into his satchel. They left the hut and cut back into the trees. The forest pressed heavy and dark. Snow fell in thicker sheets. The radio hissed with static in his bag. Elias thought, if Markov wants the archive to trade, then it is not only about knowledge, it is leverage. That means its value is political as much as it is scientific. He stopped for a moment under the cover of a pine. His breath came fast. He whispered to himself, the door did not guard a curse. It guarded a negotiation chip. And now the game is bigger than the prison. Anton joined him. So what do we do? Elias looked north. We reach Site K before Markov does. And we see with our own eyes what Moscow buried in silence. They moved again, snow swallowing their tracks as the storm thickened. Behind them, faint shouts rose as the militia regrouped. Elias pressed his hand against his coat where the microfilm rested. The weight was small, but the secrets it carried could change the shape of the hunt. The storm thickened until the trees blurred into one wall of white. Elias kept his hand over the radio in his satchel. The hiss of static guided him like a weak lighthouse. Anton walked a step behind, shoulders hunched against the wind. Their breaths rose in hard clouds. We need open ground, Elias said. A lake would hide our tracks. The wind will help. Anton pointed through the trees. There is ice ahead. I smell it. Cold over water is sharper. They broke out of the pines at the edge of a wide frozen lake. The surface looked clean and hard. Drifted snow formed long white ridges across the ice. On the far shore, dark rocks rose like a low spine. No lights, no huts, only the wind. Elias scanned the horizon and listened. The storm muffled the world, but a faint engine whine still bled through. The militia was spreading out. They were calling to each other on radios. He slipped the stolen radio from his bag and held it to his ear. Voices cut in and out. North line. Move to the river bend. Check the huts again. Command wants confirmation of the package. Elias switched the channel and pressed the transmit key once without speaking. He counted 3 seconds. He pressed again. He waited. A voice snapped back with a short burst of words. He did not reply. He put the radio away. They are blind in the storm, he said. We cross now. They stepped onto the lake. The ice groaned under their weight, then settled. Elias tested each step before he shifted his center. He set a steady pace. He kept the ridges of drifted snow between them and the tree line, so the wind would erase their trail. Halfway across, a pair of headlamps appeared at the far end of the lake. The beams moved like search eyes. The bikes were running the shoreline. Elias pulled Anton down behind a snow ridge and whispered, "Do not move. Let the wind work." The light swept close and then veered away. The riders did not see them against the white. The sound faded into the storm. Elias raised his head and looked for a path. To the right, the ice darkened near a fracture. He shifted left and signaled Anton to follow. They reached the center of the lake. The ice here was thicker and clear as glass. Bubbles were trapped like beads in a chain. Elias stopped. He knelt and pressed a glove to the surface. A deep tone lived in the ice. He could feel it, not hear it. He thought, sound moves through this like a wire. He took out the throat mics and the splitter from his coat. Anton stared at him. Now? Anton asked. Elias nodded. We use what the door taught us. The storm hides our bodies, but the ice will carry our voices. He clipped one mic to his own neck and one to Anton. He wound the metronome and set it on the ice between them. The tick felt loud in the cold. He adjusted the radio to a clear channel. He cupped the speaker to the ice and pressed transmit. When I start, Elias said, hold the second tone and let the phase offset happen. Aim your mouth at the surface. Keep it steady. Imagine the ice as the diaphragm. They began the duet. Long, short, short. Pause. Pitch low. Front vowel. Back vowel. The ice hummed under their boots. The metronome kept them honest. Their tones fused into one low wave. Elias let the last tone hang, then cut it clean. He turned the radio to the militia channel and pressed transmit again. He said one word in a calm voice. Contact. The radio exploded with replies. "Where? Who is this? Identify!" Elias answered with a clipped phrase in Russian. "Markov test. South span. Hold position." Silence hit the channel. Then a single voice replied, tense and sharp. "Say again." Elias tapped the transmit key once. He played back the duet from the recorder through the speaker. The ice sang the low phase beat. The radio picked it up and carried it like a buried drum. He cut the transmission. Another voice came back fast. "Test heard at the lake. Move south now." Engines screamed to life along the forest edge. Headlamps swung away from the lake and raced toward the far ridge. The searchline peeled off like a flock of birds. Elias stood and put the radio back in the bag. He looked at Anton. "They think they heard a beacon. We gave them a ghosting move." They crossed the last third of the lake at a run. The ice held. The wind erased their tracks as they made them. They reached the far shore and slid behind the rocks. Elias checked the map under his coat. A faint pencil line marked an old logging road that cut north to an airfield that had been abandoned in the 90s. "Airstrip," he said. 2 kilometers. They pushed into the rocks and found the road. Snow had filled the ruts, but the path still ran straight. The wind eased as the rocks broke the gusts. In 10 minutes, the trees opened and the flat expanse of the airfield appeared. A rusted hangar leaned at the far end. A faded windsock hung stiff with ice. Inside the hangar, a small twin-engine plane sat on flat tires. Its paint was chipped. Its windows were dull. But the fuselage looked intact. Tools lay scattered on a bench. Cans of fuel stood in a line against the wall. Elias moved fast. "Check the tanks," he said. "I will see the battery." Anton pried a cap and sniffed. "Fuel is old but not dead." Elias found a hand starter and a set of cables. He checked connections and scraped corrosion away with a blade. He pumped the primer and listened. The storm roared against the hangar doors. The radio hissed in his bag. Voices grew louder. The militia had corrected course. "Now," Anton said. Elias climbed into the cockpit and turned the magnetos. He gave the hand starter a pull. The engine coughed once. He primed again and pulled harder. The left engine caught with a rough bark. He fought the throttle until it settled. He started the right side. It took longer. It finally rumbled to life. The frame vibrated like a waking animal. Anton dragged the hangar doors open enough to clear the wings. Snow blew in. Elias taxied the plane onto the strip. He held the brakes and ran the engines up. Gauges swung and steadied. He glanced at Anton. "This is not pretty," he said, "but it will fly." Headlamps broke through the trees at the end of the strip. The militia had arrived. A truck skidded onto the tarmac. Men jumped out with rifles. Elias pushed the throttle forward. The plane rolled. Snow blew in white curtains. Bullets snapped past the fuselage. One punched a hole in the tail. The plane shook but held. "Hold," Elias said through gritted teeth. "Hold!" The airspeed crept up. 40, 50, 60. The strip ended in a wall of dark pines. Elias pulled gently on the yoke. The wheels lifted. The plane staggered and dropped and then climbed into clean air. Trees slid under them. The truck shrank to a dot. Anton exhaled hard and leaned back. "We are up." Elias kept the climb shallow to save power. He watched the gauges. He listened to the engines. He thought of the microfilm against his chest. He thought of the coordinates burned into the frame. He looked north where the clouds thinned to a pale band of sky. "We set down in Murmansk," he said. "From there we find a way to Site K." Anton looked at him. "And if Markov follows?" Elias kept his eyes on the horizon. "Then we make sure we reach the archive first. And we make sure the door that started this is not the last one we open. If one forgotten door in Siberia could hide a secret that survived for decades, how many more doors are still waiting to be opened? And who will be the first to step through them?"